My name is Catherine Miller. I'm a 40-year-old librarian from a small town in Virginia. I've always been the quiet one in the family, the one who remembered everyone's birthdays, who made photo albums, who helped organize church bake sales and polished the Thanksgiving silverware until it gleamed. For most of my life, I tried to be exactly what my parents raised me to be. Devout, dependable, obedient. A good Catholic daughter. Then I fell in love with a man named David. He was divorced, he had 2 children. He was kind, thoughtful, and carried the kind of calm you can only earn by surviving hard things. We met at the public library, of all places. He came in asking for a book on Civil War history for his son's school project, and we ended up talking for an hour. He came back the next week, and the next, until eventually he asked if I'd like to have coffee somewhere that didn't smell like old carpet and bookmarks. It wasn't long before I knew I wanted to build a life with him. I also knew what that decision would cost me. When I told my parents, my mother was silent for a full 10 seconds before whispering, "He's divorced?" Like it was a terminal illness. My father didn't even pretend to soften the blow. He quoted scripture at me, asked if I knew what I was doing to my soul. My 2 sisters, both married to church-going accountants with baby strollers and Pinterest-worthy homes, sent me polite but pointed texts. One said, "You're choosing someone else over your family." The other simply wrote, "Don't expect us to pretend this is okay." Still, I hoped. I thought maybe when they saw how happy I was, when they met his kids, when they realized David wasn't a scandal but a man who showed up every day and loved with quiet consistency, maybe they'd come around. They didn't. That first year, I was uninvited from Thanksgiving. No official message, just silence. When I reached out to ask about time and place, my mom replied, "We've decided to keep it small this year." I wasn't sure what small meant when my sisters and their in-laws were still going, but I understood the code. The second year, I didn't bother asking. I baked pies with David's kids, hosted a potluck with 2 of his coworkers who didn't have plans, and tried not to miss the mashed potatoes my mother used to make. By the 3rd year, I'd stopped feeling surprised by the exclusion. What shocked me was how little it hurt. Because somewhere between setting the table for 4 and hearing David's daughter whisper, "This is my favorite Thanksgiving ever," I realized I wasn't missing family. I was building one. That winter, I stopped checking my phone for texts from my sisters. I stopped saving seats at Christmas pageants that no one would fill. Instead, I focused on the life we were actually living. Imperfect, sometimes loud, sometimes messy, but ours. David's kids, Noah and Ellie, began calling me Cat instead of Miss Catherine. It stuck. I found myself teaching Ellie how to make apple crumble from scratch, the way my grandmother had taught me. Noah asked me to proofread his essays even when he didn't have to. The house, small and a little drafty in the mornings, was always full of laughter. We created new traditions: pumpkin carving on the porch, Christmas Eve board games in pajamas, Sunday brunch that always ended in a flower fight. David would squeeze my hand and say, This is what home feels like." And I'd believe him, even when a part of me still quietly mourned what I'd lost. I missed my family, in the way you miss something that used to define you. I missed the smell of my mother's stuffing, the squeak of the dining room chairs, the old gospel records my father insisted on playing. But I didn't miss the weight of being judged, of never being enough, of sitting across from people who praised forgiveness in church but couldn't extend it to me. Then, in late spring, everything changed. David got a letter in the mail, real mail, in a thick cream-colored envelope, the kind that looks like it belongs to a wedding invitation or a will. It was from a law office we'd never heard of. The return address was 2 counties over. I handed it to him while pouring coffee, half expecting it to be a mistake or spam. He opened it, read the first few lines, blinked. Then he sat down slowly, like his knees had forgotten how to work. "Everything okay?" I asked. He didn't answer right away, just kept reading. Then he looked up at me, eyes wide and full of something I couldn't name yet. Disbelief? Wonder? "It's from my great-uncle Ernest," he said. "I didn't know you had a great-uncle." Barely did either. I met him once when I was a kid. He lived in this old house out near Orange County, wore suspenders and always had lemon drops in his pocket. And David turned the letter around and read aloud. As per the last will and testament of Ernest Hamilton Kellen, the entirety of his estate, including real property, liquid assets, and personal effects, is hereby granted to David Anthony Miller, whom he remembers as the only child in the family who listened. I blinked. You inherited something? He nodded slowly. Not just something. Catherine. He left me a house, a property, 180 acres, and it's 20 minutes from here. I sat down across from him. Neither of us spoke for a full minute. When we finally did, all I could say was, "You're kidding." But he wasn't. The following week felt like a dream we didn't dare speak too loudly, afraid it might vanish if we named it. The attorney, a sharply dressed woman named Judith, met us at the gates of the property, a pair of rusted iron archways draped in ivy and thyme. We followed her up a winding road that cut through dense trees until it opened onto a clearing. And there it was. A 3-story colonial mansion, whitewashed brick with deep green shutters, nestled like a secret at the heart of a forgotten estate. A wraparound porch, a stone carriage house, fields stretching in every direction. It looked like something out of an old Southern novel, the kind of place families posed in front of for engagement photos. But this one belonged to no one now, except David. "I don't understand," he kept saying. "Why me?" Judith smiled kindly. "Your uncle wasn't close with his family. He lived simply, never married, no children. But he remembered you, David. You sent him a thank you letter when you were 7. He kept it in his desk drawer until the day he died." I touched David's arm as he stared up at the house, overwhelmed. "It's yours," I whispered. And it was. Inside, the place was surprisingly well kept. Dusty, yes, but solid. Original wood floors, a library with floor-to-ceiling shelves, a dining room big enough to fit 20 people. It hit me in waves, the irony. This place, this gift, this sprawling estate with enough space to host 100 Thanksgivings, was less than 30 minutes from the very dining room I'd been banned from. The same family that had called David a mistake, who said my marriage broke the spirit of tradition, had no idea that just down the road, he now owned more legacy than any of them ever touched. When we got home, I sat at the kitchen table while David poured wine. Neither of us said it aloud, but we were both thinking the same thing. This wasn't just poetic, it was divine. A week later, the calls started. First from my cousin Claire. "Just saw the papers. Is it true David inherited the Kellen place? The one with the oak drive and the old orchard?" Then my younger sister emailed. "Heard some interesting news. Mom was wondering if you'd considered hosting this year's Thanksgiving. Feels like a good time to bring everyone together again." A voicemail from my mother followed soon after, carefully worded. A vague suggestion of healing and family and coming full circle. And suddenly, the people who'd erased me for marrying a divorced man wanted back in. Not because they'd changed, but because now we had something they wanted to be close to. I listened to my mother's voicemail 3 times. Not because I needed clarity, but because I couldn't believe how smoothly she slipped the past under the rug. As if 3 years of silence of, "We're just not comfortable with this," could be erased with a single polite tone and a reference to our traditions. She didn't say David's name once, not even when suggesting we resume the old Thanksgiving format. Just vague phrases like, "the family, the space you now have," and how meaningful it would be for everyone to be together again. Everyone, apparently, meant them. Not the man I married, not his children, not the people who sat around our little table for the past 3 Thanksgivings, holding each other up when no one else did. I didn't respond right away. I let it sit, let the silence stretch a little longer, because now the silence was mine to hold. David came into the room while I stared at the message one last time. "They reached out?" he asked gently. I nodded. "They want to reunite the family." He didn't laugh. He just waited. I looked at him, this man who had weathered everything with quiet grace, who had never once thrown their rejection back in my face. "What do you want to do?" he asked. I breathed in slowly. "I want to make a different list this year." And so we did. We opened the doors of that estate, all 18 rooms of it, and filled it with people who didn't have anywhere else to go. David's old coworker, whose daughter hadn't spoken to him since she came out. A college student who used to work at the library and was spending her first holiday alone. Our neighbor who lost her husband last spring. A teacher. A retired postman. A boy from Noah's soccer team whose parents were stuck overseas. We didn't ask for resumes. didn't screen beliefs, didn't care who you used to sit next to at someone else's table. If you needed a place, you had one. We roasted 2 turkeys, set out mismatched chairs and borrowed tables. Ellie drew place cards in crayon, each one ending with "You belong here." And when we bowed our heads to give thanks, we did so for every person in that room who had learned to build their own family from scratch. I didn't think of my parents or my sisters. I didn't wonder if they were sitting down to dinner at the same hour, wondering why I hadn't called back. I didn't feel sad. Because in that house, in that moment, we weren't missing anything. We were full. After everyone had eaten and the last spoonful of sweet potato casserole had been scraped from the pan, people lingered. No one rushed to leave. Kids played tag in the hallway. Someone started playing quiet jazz from their phone, and 2 guests who hadn't known each other that morning were laughing like old friends by the fireplace. The dining room, with its high ceilings and candlelit windows, glowed with a kind of warmth I hadn't felt in years. Not even during those old Thanksgivings with the real family. At one point, I stepped outside onto the wraparound porch with a glass of wine. The cold air bit a little, but I didn't mind. I stood there, looking out over the empty fields and the silhouette of oak trees in the moonlight. David joined me a minute later. "You did good," he said. "We did good," I corrected. He nodded, then leaned against the railing beside me. "Do you think they're still waiting for you to call back?" I didn't have to ask who they were. "Maybe," I said. "Maybe not." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone. There were 3 unread messages. One from my mother, "Just thinking of you today, would love to talk soon." One from my sister, "Hope your day was good. We missed you." And one from a number I didn't recognize but knew instinctively belonged to a cousin I hadn't heard from since the wedding. "That house looks amazing. Maybe next year?" I powered off the phone without replying. It wasn't out of spite. I wasn't angry anymore. But some bridges don't need to be rebuilt. Some roads don't need to loop back. I turned toward David. "Next year," I said, "we build out the guest room wing, add more chairs." He smiled. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" I nodded. "We make this a tradition, for the ones still standing in the cold, the ones without a welcome back waiting, the ones who've built something better from what they were denied." He pulled me into a quiet hug, and I rested my cheek against his chest, listening to the muffled sound of laughter through the windows behind us. In that moment, I knew exactly what we were building. Not just a new family. A new legacy. By the time December rolled around, word had spread further than we expected. Someone from the local paper reached out. They'd heard about the Thanksgiving gathering at the old Hamilton estate and wanted to write a feature on it. I said no, politely. This wasn't about publicity. It wasn't some charity stunt. It was simply a table. A door that stayed open. A space for people who didn't have one. But something had shifted since that day. We started receiving letters, handwritten ones, emails, quiet messages from people I barely knew, some I hadn't spoken to in years. A former classmate wrote, "I saw what you did. My parents stopped speaking to me after my divorce. Your story gave me hope that maybe the loneliness won't last forever." Another from a former church friend, "I never told you this, but my brother was gay. My parents pushed him away. I always regretted not speaking up. What you and David are doing, it's holy in the way real love is." And one message that made me sit down on the edge of my bed and read it twice. "I was at your wedding. I didn't defend you when the family turned cold. I should have. I hope one day you'll let me help set the table." I didn't reply to that one either. Not yet. Because it wasn't about being petty. I wasn't keeping score. But for the first time in my life, I understood what boundaries felt like. Not as a wall, but as a gate I got to open when it felt safe. Meanwhile, the house slowly came alive again. We started renovating the east wing. Not for us, we had more than enough space, but to build out 3 full guest rooms for future holidays. David called it the orchard rooms. Ellie made a wooden sign in school that read, "Everyone deserves a seat." I hung it in the entryway, above the coat rack. That winter, we celebrated Christmas with 13 people around our dining room table. Not a single one of them was related to me by blood, but every single one of them felt like family. And as I poured hot cider into mugs and watched the snow starting to dust the windowsills, I realized something I hadn't dared put into words before. This wasn't just a home. It was a sanctuary. The following Thanksgiving, the house was full before noon. We had to borrow folding tables from the community center. David and Noah set them up end to end in the garden room, lining them with mismatched tablecloths and centerpieces made from pine cones and paper leaves. Ellie ran around taping name tags to chairs, giggling every time someone asked where they were assigned. We didn't assign seats. That was kind of the point. The kitchen buzzed like a hive. 4 ovens going at once. The smell of rosemary and brown sugar thick in the air. Friends arrived with casseroles, homemade pies, trays of tamales, rice dishes, vegan stuffing, one enormous pot of gumbo. Stories came with the food, where the recipe came from, who taught them to make it, who they thought of when they cooked it. It was noisy, beautifully, joyfully noisy. Somewhere between the mashed potatoes and the second round of pumpkin pie, I stepped out onto the porch again, same spot as last year. This time, I wasn't alone. One of our guests, a soft-spoken woman named Therese who had come alone, stood beside me. She looked out at the trees, then at the laughter drifting through the open windows. "I haven't had a Thanksgiving in years," she said. "My parents stopped inviting me after I left the church. It never stopped hurting." I nodded, not needing to say a word. She looked at me, tears brimming. "Thank you for doing this, for letting us in." I squeezed her hand gently. "Everyone deserves a seat," I said. Later that evening, when the candles were burning low and people had kicked off their shoes and leaned back in their chairs like they never wanted to leave, someone raised a glass for an impromptu toast. "To chosen family," they said. "To new traditions, and to the people who taught us how not to love, so we could do it better." There were murmurs of agreement. Glasses clinked. I looked across the table at David, who smiled at me with that quiet knowing he always had. The kids were laughing with a guest I didn't even know 2 weeks ago. The fire crackled. Someone had brought a guitar. I didn't think about my parents that night, or my sisters. I didn't wonder if they'd gathered. I didn't wonder if they'd talked about me, because I had built something real. Not in spite of being rejected, but because of it. And that's how I learned, sometimes family is blood. Sometimes, it's people who see you when others choose not to. But the real kind of family? It's the ones who show up, again and again, no matter what. And that's how I learned that family isn't about who raised you. It's about who shows up when it's hard and stays when it matters most. Ever been pushed out of your family's traditions? Share your story in the comments. Subscribe to EN Reddit Story for real tales of resilience and poetic justice, and send this to someone who knows what chosen family really means.